Endurance Junkie Podcast, episode 15. Hey Junkie, thank you for joining me for episode 15 of the Endurance Junkie Podcast, the show where I will be interviewing some of the fastest, smartest, and most inspiring people active in the endurance world today. Joining me now is John Newsom, and you might know him as one of the co-hosts of the world-famous IMTalk podcast that he does on a weekly basis together with Bevan James Eyles. Now, besides the podcast, John is a respected triathlete himself. He's raced as a pro for a couple of years in Europe, but after returning to New Zealand, he started a successful coaching business. John, thanks for taking the time to chat here today. For those of us who don't know you, and there's probably not many of those, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and how you ended up in triathlon?
It's been a bit of a long road. I started in, 1991, I think was my first races, and I was about 13 or 14 at the time. Tried my hand at swimming for a number of years and was it was okay, but just sort of regional level finalist at best. And then figured out that because I was fit from swimming, I could run fairly well. Not that I was a good runner, but I was fit, so I did quite well in the cross country. And then when I figured those two together and sort of realised I wasn't going to progress too far with my swimming, triathlon was sort of the next obvious choice, and I was very, very fortunate at the time. The pool that I swam at was the same pool. There was a triathlon or a surf life-saving triathlon in a masters group, and one of the guys that swam in there was Dr. John Hallemans, who was one of the sort of first triathlon coaches, certainly in New Zealand, and one of the early ones around the world, and got introduced to him on day one. So I went straight under his wing, and the rest was history after that. He sort of had a group that I could go and train with. I was only, as I said, sort of 14 at the time, 13 or 14, and I was training with adults at that stage. So I'd go along to a running session every week and be training with adults. So it was a bit of, had to grow up pretty quickly, and just very fortunate to be at the right time, at the right place at the right time, and had really good opportunities. And through having John as a coach, one thing led to another, and got involved in the New Zealand sort of junior program, and eventually sort of ended up racing full time for a couple of years.
Cool. So you went on to win national junior titles in New Zealand, and then went on to, I think, even compete in world championships and ITU World Cups, right?
Yeah, so I started off, I had a few years in the juniors, and back in those days it was the under 20. You didn't have the under 19 and under 23. It was a straight under 20, and it was Olympic distance, non-drafting. My last year, I think, as a junior was the last time it was a non-drafting race, and certainly didn't set the world on fire. I was one of the youngest ones to be competing in Wellington. We had the world champs here in 1994. I didn't race in 1995, and then 1996 raced in Cleveland, Ohio. I can't actually remember off the top of my placing, but it wasn't anything special. It might have been in the top 20 if I was lucky, but certainly was not setting the world on fire. But really after that, had a bit of then my breakthroughs kind of came a bit after coming out of the junior ranks, and probably the highlight of my career in New Zealand was actually finishing third in the New Zealand champs in, I think it was 1998, in a place called Gisborne, on a very, very, very tough day, and beating some big names in the process. And I was a kid from Christchurch who did not have a great deal of talent, and I could swim okay, I could bike okay and run okay, but was certainly not exceptional at any of the three. Yet on that day I managed to beat some pretty big names, and that sort of catapulted me to going and doing some racing overseas, and racing out of a team in a place called Mulhouse or Mulhouse in France, depending on if you French or German, and had a couple of years racing out of that club. And again, I was certainly not setting the world on fire, but it was, for a 21, 22-year-old guy, it was a great way to see the world, and, still had some pretty memorable performances.
Yeah, I remember one of the pictures that I saw from you, and I think it was with Macca and Crowe and Bevan Doherty on it. And you guys were all living and training in France at the time. Can you tell us a bit about the lifestyle that you guys had back then?
Yeah, it was pretty simple because it was before the internet really took off. I remember back then, we were getting into our emails, especially the second year we were there, but there certainly was nothing like it was today. So it was very much every man for himself. A lot of us had coaches when we were back in New Zealand or Australia, and then when we went over there, you sort of lost contact. You still kept a little bit of advice from back home, but most of the guys didn't have coaches. We just kind of made it up on the fly, and we've got to remember back then, this is 1998 and 99 that I was in France. The first season was on our team in Mulhouse. We had myself, Craig Alexander, who was not the Craig Alexander we know today, Bevan Doherty, likewise. We had another Kiwi guy called Mark O'Donnell and another Kiwi guy called James Beach, another Australian called Chris Lee, and we're all on the same team. And the reason we were able to have that sort of antipathy and feel on the team was we all had parents who were British or had ancestral ties, so we were all racing on European passports. So it was kind of fortunate, and it made life a lot easier for us because we did have guys to hang out with and do stuff with, whereas some of the early guys that used to go over to Europe, they were very much by themselves. There might be one Kiwi or one Aussie on the team, and it was a lot more lonely. So we had that advantage. But back then, Macca was I think the first year he was a defending world champion, and he came over and got his ass handed to him quite badly by a few people, and he turned up in Mulhouse to train with Crowie. And back then they were great mates, and they just tried to train the house down, and we did some pretty crazy things. But probably my biggest memory of the first time in France was Macca turned up. And the first day he turned up, I think he got hammered in a World Cup race in Zurich, I think it was, and he came in and he was pretty unhappy about it all. And so the first day we did 100 100s at the pool, and on a pretty tricky time schedule. And then the next day we did 16 400s in the pool, and my poor old arms didn't cope too well with that. And then I remember a couple of days later, we decided to go for a bit of a team camp for a couple of days, and we started riding out of town, and we had all the local heroes with us, and they had Macca in the group, and they were trying to hammer through town. And the next thing I know, there's a pole in the middle of the bike path, and each person down the line seemed to be missing it by less and less. And then I was towards the tail end of the group, and managed to clip the pole with my hand. I didn't come off my bike, but my finger got rather badly bent out of place, and it was pretty severely dislocated. And Craig Alexander, for people that don't know, is actually a qualified physio. I don't think he's ever practiced as a physio, but he was a qualified physio, and I was just standing there in quite a bit of pain and asking him to put it back in, and he'd never done anything like that. And he decided to give it a go, and gave it a good old yank and tried to put it back in, and I think it went back in, but at the same time we heard a fairly big crack, and that was my finger breaking. And so the next 4 weeks or so I had my hand basically in plaster, and so it was not the greatest start to my career in France, and the first year was not especially memorable in terms of my racing was not great, but the second year I went back and had a pretty fantastic season.
Were you guys supported any way by the French clubs, or how did it work?
Yeah, very much so. So ASTTP Mulhouse was our team, and the first year I was there, they basically put me up with a French family. I was out in the middle of nowhere, so I spoke zero French, but just had this fantastic family that put me up, and they fed me, and then it was basically down to us to, we had access to all the facilities we needed in terms of the pool, the running track, and what have you, transfers to races, entry fees, and that's pretty much where it stopped for me. So there was some bonus things in place, but really it meant we were over there, and for me I had a free living, so I had next to no expenditure other than getting myself to France, and then I was trying to make ends meet by racing for money, and I generally targeted fairly small races. I didn't go off and do European Cups or World Cups or anything like that. I focused on the more regional races and tried to pick up few hundred francs here and a few hundred francs there, and a good one I might get a couple of thousand, and just try to make ends meet that way. So it was certainly for me very much a subsistence living. I wasn't making necessarily a career out of it, but I was breaking even, and the way that I managed to make it all work well for me was then I'd go and spend a good period of the year in Hong Kong and actually be a training partner for their number one over there, and do a bit of coaching on the side. And that's how I managed to make ends meet for 12 months a year, was going sort of Hong Kong, a little bit of time back home with my parents, and then back over to France, and sort of did that for a couple of years, and spent quite a lot of time in Hong Kong.
Yeah, cool stuff. Yeah, it's only the things you can do when you're young and free and unattached, I guess.
Yeah, when I look at things these days, and you see some of the Ironman athletes, who are in their 30s or late 20s, and they sort of seem to be at a similar level, just cruising around, probably making hardly any money. It's a bit of a head scratcher for me. Good on them for following their dreams, but we were not making big money back then. Macca was already a big name. Crowe was not a big name whatsoever, but he was working his way up. He was essentially just another one of the Australians, but had a real affinity for doing well at the half Ironman races. But in terms of the drafting events and World Cups and French Grand Prix, he was not setting the world on fire. And Bevan Doherty, he was struggling with injuries from time to time, but he was really starting to make his mark. And again, this is 1998 and 1999. I think the second year we were there, he ended up winning the European Cup series, and it was just slowly starting to move up the ranks. So those guys, especially Bevan, he just used to train the house down. He was incredibly hungry. He was not the most talented guy on the block, nor was Craig Alexander, but they worked at it for years and years and years before they became household names. So it was kind of cool to see where those guys really came from.
Yeah, true. Yeah. Now, then you started doing longer stuff, but that was already 2004. What did you do in between leaving France and then starting your Ironman career?
I got a real job for a bit. Went over to the UK, went back and did a bit more study. So I had a Bachelor of Commerce under my belt from after school, and then I went back and did a graduate diploma in e-commerce, and then decided to ship off to the UK with my girlfriend and now wife Belinda, and we had a couple of years in the UK where I really didn't do much triathlon stuff until the very, very end. Just had a regular job, doing a sales job and seeing Europe and traveling a lot more. Still kind of stayed fit, did a little bit of running races, but certainly nothing special. And really decided towards the end of that it wasn't necessarily for me. And I had a good friendship with Gordo Byrne, and he was back in Christchurch, and we kind of conversed, and he was going to help me sort of set up my business, and I'd helped him out a lot earlier on, and so I sort of started when I was in the UK, just slowly started building things up in terms of establishing a coaching business, and then came back to Christchurch and really kicked it off in 2004. And at the same time really decided that I achieved a lot of what I thought I could achieve at the short distance stuff. Had some towards the end of my full-time career, really felt that I got as close to my peak as I could without really sticking it out for another 3 or 4 years. I was really pleased with what I'd done, but I'd never done an Ironman, and so I figured, right, come back here, get back on the horse and see what I can do an Ironman. So I did Ironman New Zealand in 2005, racing as a professional, but I was far from a professional. But I figured I might be able to scrape into the top 10, and that would pay for my entry fee. So I figured that was a good thing to do, and I did finish. I think I finished 9th. 10th. 10th it was at Ironman New Zealand. Had a reasonable day for debut, and that actually qualified me for Kona. So on the spot I thought, I hadn't really thought about that, and so then signed up for Kona racing as a professional, and I just I was totally out of my depth when I went to Kona and got absolutely whooped.
Yeah. Is this why you're doing Project 2014? Do you feel like you have some unfinished business there?
Definitely.
Tell us a bit about your Project 2014, what it is all about, and
Yeah, so 2005, when I raced Kona, I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. And again, I was racing the professional division, and I was well out of my league, and completely cocked up the pacing, went out far, far too hard, and it was misery. I also had a very, very bad injury before the race and couldn't run, but even before I got to the run, I'd already cooked myself. And so, yeah, I haven't raced in Kona since in terms of doing the Ironman, and so that was certainly one of my motivators for going back this year and doing my project 2014 was one day I said, I'm coming back to this island and I'm going to do this race justice. I may not be in the same level of fitness at what I was when I'm in my late 20s or early 30s, but I'm going to come back and I want to race to my potential and sort of no ambitions of finishing way up the field, but just want to go and do a respectable job of it. And I didn't realistically think that would happen until maybe I was more into my 40s. I've got kids and stuff now, and it's just bloody hard to train for Kona and do well there, and that's what I wanted to do. I wasn't interested in going back and just making up numbers. I wanted to go over there and have a really, really solid day at the office. So Bevan and I were over there doing IMTalk 2 years ago, and I was sitting on the sidelines and just watching the race and going, I think I'm ready to get back into this, and then my brain started ticking over of how the hell can I make it happen? Financially, how can I make it happen? How can I get in good shape? We have to train through the New Zealand winter. I've got to qualify initially as well, and I never really saw qualifying as a major hurdle. I figured, I'm good enough to qualify as long as I'm in reasonable sort of fitness, and then just started plugging things together, and I knew a key component was to try to get bike fit. That's my weakest discipline and the area which worries me the most. So then I figured, right, I'll schedule an epic camp, and that's a way where I can go and train, do massive volume, and see a different part of the world, and also be a means for helping for paying things as well. So yeah, that started the ball rolling, and then and I knew it was going to take me 2 years to get back into reasonable sort of shape. I was certainly not a fatty or grossly out of shape, but I was far from being any sort of contender in the age group. So I knew it was going to take 2 years, and it has taken 2 years, and I haven't quite got back to up to a level that I quite wanted to get to. I'm not too far off. But it's been a long process getting back in shape, and there's certainly been some hurdles along the way, which meant that I didn't qualify quite as early or quite as easily as I would have liked to. But the race is now coming up pretty thick and fast, and I've got pretty good confidence that I'm going to put in a reasonable effort.
All right, because the last Ironman you did before starting this project 2014 was Ironman Road in 2008. Is that correct?
It was, yeah, and I was in okay shape for that one, and I had an okay day. So I had a sensational swim, arguably my best swim ever. I couldn't believe it. Belinda, my wife, was watching on the bridge you swim under in Rote, and she's looking at the front of the field going, pretty sure that's John in like 10th place or something coming out of the swim, and I just couldn't believe I had a great swim. But again, my biking was my Achilles heel that day, and I got absolutely spanked all over the place on the bike, and got really, really drilled. But then I came back and I ran a 3-hour flat marathon, and so I finished with an 8:51. I kind of felt that I was probably in about 8:45 shape, but yeah, that bike really, really let me down that day. Rote was a great race, but again, didn't quite feel that I was at my top of my game, mainly on the bike. So that was the last one. So I haven't raced an iron distance since then. But probably one thing that gives me reasonable confidence for Kona is, the run is just really challenging in Kona. It's so hot. But the last 2 years, I've done a Kona camp for around the 70.3, and both years, despite having a really massive week of training, I've actually run really, really well off the bike and been quite competitive on the run. So that gives me confidence that, come a few weeks' time, I will, run well and I can handle the heat, and that's always a problem coming out of winter for us.
Yeah, I know the feeling there.
Yeah.
So besides a coach and definitely a fast age grouper, and you touched on the subject before, you're also the co-host of IMTalk, which is like one of the most popular triathlon podcasts out there. And hope to achieve your levels of audience one day. How did you get involved in that?
Well, Bevan, the other guy that I do the podcast with, at the time I started coaching him because he was formerly coached by one of New Zealand's, Bevan Doherty's coach, Mark Elliott, and Mark was going off and doing different things and wasn't doing any more age group coaching, so Bevan approached me and started coaching him that year, and that was the same year that I was doing Ironman New Zealand, and he's a pretty strong athlete, and so we did quite a bit of riding together and just created a bit of a friendship as well as me coaching him, and both achieved really good things at Ironman New Zealand that year. My 10th was a solid day at the office. Bevan, I think, won his age group fairly convincingly, and we also had other guys here training as well. We had Gordo and Klaus Bjorling and Bjorn Anderson and guys like that, and we had a fantastic day, all of us in Taupo. And then I can't remember what year it was. I think it must have been 2006 we started the podcast. Bevan just said, I've got this idea. We just get on and we talk about stuff and see what happens. And it was pretty crap to start with, I think, when we first kicked off. We didn't really know what we were doing. I didn't even know what a podcast was. But we just sort of kicked off and people seemed to like what we were doing. And we had a few really good interviews early on in terms of getting guys like Peter Reid on the show, and that gave us a bit more of an audience. And then, just each year it's just got a bit bigger and bigger, and people seem to be happy to come on the show. And I guess my biggest fear was sounding like a dick when I'm on the podcast and not having enough to talk about. But I just thought we'd run out of content. I just thought there's only so much we can talk about, and I was looking at it more for, from a coaching perspective. Right, there's only so many coaching discussions we can have, but we just kept coming up with different features and trying to engage the audience and have them as part of a community. And by doing that, then we just get given content, and content just creates itself, and stories and age groupers and people submitting websites, and these days there's more and more news, so we can have more discussions and debates around sort of hot topics, and the interviews are a really integral part of the show as well, and that helps us. I think it gives the pros a really good voice, and that's what I'm really passionate about, is trying to promote professional athletes, and they don't get misquoted. They basically come on the show and they can talk about whatever. We try to keep it interesting, and just people seem to like our style.
Yeah, no, it is really cool, and definitely worth a listen. I'll make sure to put the necessary links in the show notes here so people can check it out and definitely subscribe, because it's one of my favorite podcasts of the week as well.
Nice, appreciate it.
What else did I want to talk to you about? Back to Kona, I guess. I've got some quick fire round of Project 2014 questions for you. Is that all right?
Yeah, no problem.
I think there's been there was a discussion on IMTalk as well about this. Are you going to get chicked in Kona?
I'm thinking the answer is probably yes. By how many chicks is going to be the big question. I'll be disappointed if I get checked by more than 5 people, and that's not because I'm a sexist pig, but when I add up my times, I think for me to achieve what I want to achieve over there, if I'm not in the top 5 out of the girls, I think that's a really a good indicator if I've had a good day or a bad day. And I think in terms of our age group, the 35 to 39 age group, it's looking like it's going to be incredibly strong. So I may finish further down the rankings than what I had initially thought I would have, but I may have had a fantastic race. And the pro girls seem to be really consistent. And so, judging off my numbers, if I'm not in the top 5 out of the girls, I probably haven't had a very good day. To beat all the girls, I'm going to have an exceptional day, really, really exceptional day. It's not impossible, but I think I'll have to have an exceptional day.
Are you in sub 9 hour shape?
Yep, definitely. It kind of depends on what course, obviously, but if I was to go and rock up to Rote or something, and it was similar conditions to what, say it's a fastish day in Rote, I would predict I'm in sort of 8:40 to 8:45 Rote shape. if everything goes according to plans. So again, you put that in the mix with some of the girls that have raced road. I'm not going to be beating someone like a Chrissy, but I'm probably going to beat a lot of the other girls there. So definitely think I'm a sub 9 hour shape. Whether I can do that in Kona or not, I think it largely depends on what the conditions are like. Last year was pretty fast, and I probably would have, liked to think I was sub 9 if it was last year's conditions.
Who are the other fast guys in your age group? Just 35, 39, right?
Yeah, they seem to be springing up all over the place. We had a bit of a debate about. I've got Antonio Colum, who is
he doesn't count.
He doesn't count.
No.
So he is, I guess, the fastest. Then I know that we've got your guy Sam Guide in there as well. I hear he's injured, but he's still on paper much, much faster than me. I also heard that Trent Chapman is racing. He's an Australian former ITU rock star. So I look at the age group and think I'm probably one of 15 guys that might have a chance of getting in the top 5. I think there's a lot of guys that are stronger than me, but we know what Ironman's like. It's not everybody has their greatest day. So, I think I'm like one of 15 guys probably going for a top 5. And hopefully I get my fantastic day, and some guys maybe falter a little bit, and we'll see what we can do.
Yeah. When will you be happy with your race?
Out there, I have a pretty clear idea. I've got the swim. Who knows what I can do in this? My swim's probably the one area where I haven't quite got up to the level where I think where I've been in the past, or even remotely close. But I know on the bike what numbers I'll be happy with in terms of my power output. So if I can hit my numbers on the bike, and if I can then get off on the bike and run under 3 hours 5 minutes, and ideally close to 3 hours, then I'll be pretty happy. Again, conditions, subject to conditions, but that's really what I'm shooting for is under 3:05 on the bike. Dream day would be sub 3, but that's a pretty big ask. I'm shooting to for a certain wattage on the bike or a range, and the swim, the swim is what it is, but I'm a reasonable swimmer, so I'd expect to be towards the front. So I'll when I cross that finish line, I won't be I will have answered most of the questions, I think.
Yeah. And what are you going to do if you feel if the race hasn't gone to plan and you really had a shocking day out there? Is there a Project 2015?
There is no Project 2015, and if there was, the Project 2015 would involve probably being divorced and single with no family, so that's not going to happen. No. So no, I have no backup plan. My next sort of goals are going to be putting time back into the family and back into my athletes that I coach, because they have been somewhat neglected this year to some degree, and then really want to look at other things. I'll probably maybe go do some more running races. I quite enjoyed having a run focus a couple of years ago, ran a reasonable sort of marathon, and then maybe look at doing some trail races. We've got heaps of fantastic exploration trail races in New Zealand, and then I guess my other big thing to build up for will be planning an epic camp in Kona, France in 2016 for my 40th. So that's probably going to be my next big objective. But I'm putting a fair amount of pressure on myself to perform in this in Kona, and as much as it is about a one-day event and that's really the icing on the cake, for me it's been a large part of it's been about the whole process of building up for the event, preparing for it as well as I can, given I've got a job, given I've got family and going through winter and blah blah blah, lots of factors going on, and I just wanted to share that experience with other people and share my power files, my GPS files, and just try to show people the way that I do it and practice what I preach. So from that regard, it's been successful already. I've done I've really hit my training very, very closely to what I've hoped to in terms of the hours that I can fit things in. As I said earlier on, there were some hiccups along the way, but by and large, I've hit things pretty well, and it really comes down to executing a good race plan on the day, because the races that I've done this year, I've had different objectives, different plans, but this time I'm going to be hitting things a bit conservatively and really shooting for a fast run split.
Yeah, and I guess that along the way you gathered a lot of knowledge that will definitely help your coaching. What made you decide to take up coaching in the first place? And can you tell us a bit about your coaching philosophy?
Yeah, it's I guess I kind of almost started coaching myself from a very, very young age, just by prescribing myself little core routines when I was a swimmer in terms of, right, I'm going to do 50 chin-ups, 50 press-ups, and I kind of got just enjoyed doing program prescription for myself initially, and when I started out with John Hellman's, I sort of became one of our sort of team leaders in terms of trying to set a good example, and I think I just always thought that I was not a particularly talented athlete, but I realised that hard work could get me places, and that's, I guess, part of my coaching philosophy is, if you're prepared to work hard, you don't have to be the most talented. You can beat a lot of other athletes out there by having good execution, being consistent, and just believing in yourself and not worrying about other athletes that might be more talented than you, because they don't necessarily always perform. And I think people like Bevan Doherty are fantastic examples. I've known those guys for a lot of years, and they are not the most talented athletes in the world, yet they have got Olympic medals. And I just think that that's one of the big things about our sport. Consistent long-term hard work can get you some pretty sensational results, and I guess that is what my coaching philosophy revolves around, is consistently putting in the work. And yes, we have epic camps and things like that where you look for a bit of a spike in fitness, but it's all about consistency, adapting to athlete specific setup. I coach athletes that are doctors, that have shift work and have families, and just always adapting, and probably if in doubt, being slightly conservative rather than going over the top, in order to have that long-term consistency, because it usually takes 4 or 5 years to really start to hit your straps with Ironman, depending on what your background is. So I guess in terms of my coaching philosophy, it's pretty straight up, not too much nonsense, just getting out there, doing the hard work, being consistent, and committed to whatever you agree to with your coach. And that's what I have athletes that do 8 hours a week training. I have athletes that do 25 hours a week of training. But the main thing is when we have an agreement, we say, right, this is what we're going to pitch for, and then getting out there and doing it on a consistent basis.
Yeah, that's definitely, consistency is definitely something that I hear a lot when I talk to other people and other coaches.
Definitely.
To round things off, how can people get in touch with you? Do you have room for new athletes, for example?
I probably will after Kona, so from November on. So my website is coachjohnnewsom.com. My Project 2014 one is coachjohnproject2014.com, and that has every single training file and workout that I've done since February 2013. So about 18, 19 months worth of training files, and I had hoped to put more information up there in terms of talking through my periodization a lot more and what have you. It has ended up being more of a training journal, but after the race, that might be an area where I can try to publish get some more information together. But certainly people seem to find the files interesting, and I'll be having my Kona files up there. I'll also have live tracking on Kona race day, because we know that Ironman tracking is pretty ordinary, but I'm actually going to be carrying a GPS device, and I'll have links from my websites on how people can track me 100% all the way through the race, and it's live tracking with a GPS device. So looking forward to that. So those are the main ways, and then if they like what they hear, then they can listen into IMTalk.
All right, cool. Well, I'll make sure to put all the links in the show notes. All right, thanks for your time, John. It's been a pleasure.
No problem.
Have a safe trip to Kona. Have a good race, and we'll definitely be watching it live on your stream.
No problem. Thanks for helping promote the sport.
Yeah, my pleasure. Cheers, John.